Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I'm the actor.
My name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
Here we go.
Okay, it's episode 200. So I'm excited.
200.
This is this is a big episode. So not only are we going to be talking about our top 10 favorite movies of all time, we're also debuting a new logo created by Justin Arner, who's been on our podcast multiple times talking about all things Star Wars. So thank you, Justin, for doing that for us. It's an awesome logo. I've had it on my phone, like as the background, the wallpaper, and it's pretty awesome. So yeah, I get to see it every day. It's pretty cool. So we'll be putting that out when we put out this episode. So you're looking at it right now. And so before we get started on our top 10 movies of all time, favorite movies of all time, I had a couple of lists. We both have honorable mentions, but I also made like a very quick list of movies that won't be on the list due to being too disturbing, but they're great. And they're movies that like I have seen them multiple times. I will probably watch them. Actually, one of them I'm about to watch again here pretty soon. But they're movies that like, they're great movies, but I don't necessarily want to like watch them every week or every month or maybe even every year. So first one I wrote down was Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin, which we've talked about. So that's Scarlett Johansson, and it's a great movie, and it has a lot going for it. I also like his movie Sexy Beast, but that Under the Skin specifically, with the music from the music from Mika Levy, is just, the whole thing is crazy amazing, and it gives you a feeling much like that movie. We've talked about this one too, Dogtooth. It is a movie that I'm glad I got to revisit, and I'm glad you got to see it, but I haven't seen it since. And it's a movie that I think that our listeners will definitely like to dig into at some point. But I don't know I think there's times when you're ready for it and there's times when you're not. And, you just need to be ready to challenge yourself with a movie like Yorgos Lanthimos' Dogtooth. And then the last movie I'll very quickly mention is A Clockwork Orange. And that's the movie that I'm about to see again, because that's the next movie in my Stanley Kubrick marathon, and Paul's just shaking his head. So are you going to ever see that movie again?
I don't know. I
Okay.
honestly used to say I would probably not see it again. And it's a high holy compliment. I think it's a fantastic movie. I've seen it, I don't know, a handful of times, 2 or 3 times, I think. And the last time I saw it, I was like, okay, I'm done. Like I've seen it. I have taken what I'm taking from it, and it's just, it's a film that I live when I watch it, and that's a hard film to live. And I usually do live the films that I watch. So there's just something about the movie, and we've talked about this before. It's not necessarily all of the scenes that everybody will remember. It's not those. It's the wallpaper in his mother's kitchen. Yeah, I don't know if you remember it. It's like shiny and circly in one, and then flat and angular and velvet on the another wall. It just gives me this feeling. It's not, I don't feel sick in my stomach, but I feel like I could not live in these people's world on any level. And it's a compliment. He does strike a tone with that movie. He strikes this complete attitude with this movie, and in a good way. And he makes a social statement, and he's made a statement that probably was about 30 years before its time. It would have been interesting to see what Kubrick would have done with the electronic age that we're in now. But on some kind of level, that whole dystopia and youth running wild in the streets and dressing up as gangs, and a very particular type of gang, not in your traditional sense of an American gang, but a sense of a gang in the fact that they're more than one persons, and they dress a similar way, and they have the same values, and they do the same things. It's just got this feel about it. So I don't know. All 3 of those movies that you mentioned, I thought they were superb. Under the Skin, I have seen twice and would watch again in a heartbeat. Dogtooth, I don't know when I'll ever be ready for that again. I just don't know. There's going to come a time where I'm going to start to wonder what I saw versus what I took from it, and maybe we'll have to watch it again. And sometimes that's good, because I saw Antichrist twice. And the second time I saw it, I was like, oh, maybe because I saw it already, that's not as disturbing. And it's interesting what he does to make it as disturbing as it is. And the way that he jump cuts some of those scenes to make them look like something that's happening that's not happening is amazing. But I took something completely different from that film a second time I saw it. Mm-hmm. Do I ever want to see that movie again? Probably not. So more than likely, I don't know, unless it's like this major like anniversary and there's a new film stock footage digitalized version of A Clockwork Orange and I have a free ticket and people are going to hug me afterwards, then maybe I'd go again. But I don't know. They're spectacular movies, don't get me wrong, but they stay with me too. So I've got to watch what I'm packing up here because, man, it sticks. So,
well, you better watch out because 2021 is the 50th anniversary of Clockwork Orange. So something tells me they're going to do something similar to what they did with 2001 on a very small level. Maybe it's not the same kind of a movie in culture that 2001 is. I don't think. It's definitely not as socially accepted as 2001 is. So, and the other list I'll go through very quickly, and then you can go through yours. Our honorable mentions, I only have a handful of them. One is Bringing Up Baby, the Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn movie from 1939, I believe. It's one of those screwball comedies that I can just put on at any time, and I just absolutely love it. And it's a fun movie to watch. I think even for people nowadays can go back to it. It's not slow at all. It's the opposite of slow. It is frenetic. And then I've got two David Fincher movies that did not make my list. And one is The Social Network and the other one is Zodiac. And as much as I love David Fincher, he does not show up on my list. And they're very close, but they're just not there. And then the last one I'll bring up is Cool Hand Luke, which is another movie that I find myself thinking about constantly, just over and over again. And I was kind of amazed that it didn't make my list, but it didn't. And it's that one's probably number 11. It is probably number 11 if I had to make a number 11. So Paul Newman is amazing in it. I mean, we've talked about it in the past, and we've talked about the performances, all the way down the line, from Strother Martin to Kennedy. What's his first name? Oh, that's bad. He won an Academy Award.
George
Kennedy. There are so many memorable scenes in that movie. That is another one of those movies where I think you could just kind of turn it on, or if it's on cable, you could just watch it from any point in there, and it's awesome. It has so many different contexts you can look at that film from, and you can draw from it, the subtext of the whole movie all the way through, or you can just look at it as, just a story from front to back. So it's a great movie. So what about you?
All right. Well, first of all, congratulations on 200th episode. It's pretty tremendous.
You too.
And thank you. And thank you to Justin for doing our logo and making it look spectacular. It really is great. It just is right. It's just right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. When I saw it, I was like, yep. I don't know what I'm going to I don't know if they're expecting me to give some kind of analytical critique of this, but this looks right. And I was actually looking at it on my phone at the theater, and somebody was like, wow, what is that? And I was like, well, I think it's a secret, but I'll let you in on it since you're my theater buddy right now. This is the new logo to my podcast, or our podcast. And she was like, wow, that's really cool looking. It looks old school. It looks kind of like it's chalk. People will see what we're talking about. It's just really well done. So thank you, Justin. And would love to have him back to talk about whatever the next Star Wars film is going to be. I'm sure we will and we should. I personally said after meeting him the first time that we should do that, since there's going to be a film every year, that we should just continuously have him on as a guest because he's just spectacular. He's a really nice guy. He loves those movies, and he has an interesting take on it. And I actually thought the last time that we spoke to him, I was sort of swaying him a little bit more towards my side.
Oh no, I don't think so. Because we talked about.
He said, and it's recorded, that he didn't like the film the first time. Then the second time he saw it, he was like, oh, yeah, I get it. I see what he's doing. And then he saw it a third time again with his wife, and he went, nope, these problems I still have. And that's where he was when he came to the podcast. So technically speaking, if he had only saw it that second time, he would have been more about it. So I'm just, So it took him 3 times to decide. Mm-hmm. Twice not good, once good. So thank you, Justin. We appreciate you. Yes, it's interesting that you always have honorable mentions, and I definitely chose to do that too because it is hard for me to make this list. We've talked about this in the past. I'm not that comfortable with it because, yes, it's ever-changing, and yes, we can add things and change things. It's just a definitive way to look at people's movie-going processes by seeing their top 10 lists. So I don't care about people judging me. I don't care about people liking or disliking what I like. I don't know. I guess if I was at the end of my journey of life and I knew I had only a couple minutes to live, I would write down a top 10 movie list, and then that could be the definitive because what's next always gets me. It always gets me. And one movie that did just come out recently has made it to my top 10 list, which has not changed a whole lot since we originally talked 5 years ago about this. So I'll start with my number 13th, if you will. I did them in order. But for honorable mentions, number 13, It's a Wonderful Life. And here's why. It pretty much sums up the rest of my list. My movies are not necessarily what we talked about this before, that they're not the best movies of all time per se, although this is one of the greatest movies of all time. It's about our favorite movies. And how I qualify that is by saying every time I get near it, see it, think about it, it comes on TV, I watch it, I get excited again. And every single time I see these movies, when I watch it again, I have the same emotional response to it that I had the first time. And it's not normal, actually, because you just don't get the same thing over and over again with the same movie after watching it. But there is a feeling that I get when I see these movies, and the original feeling stays with me. And then when I watch it again or am possessed to watch it again, I have that feeling. And only because there was 10, It's a Wonderful Life did not make it up there because it just didn't. And I recommend going and seeing it in an old movie theater on Christmas Eve. And if you don't have the Christmas spirit when you walk out of that movie, you are not going to have the Christmas spirit, because I went and saw it on Christmas Eve at the Bird, which is in Richmond, which is an old, it's an old theater. And it was amazing to see it on the big screen, and it was amazing to see it on Christmas Eve. It just was special. And I discuss back and forth with people that, is that really a Christmas movie? Because really, it's only the last 20 minutes that takes place at Christmas time, the first part and the last part, and that's it. But it ends at Christmas, so they consider it a Christmas movie. But it's just a movie that holds up. It's one of those movies that is recommended. Everybody sees. It's on the top 100 AFI. I think it's up in the top 20 if I remember correctly. And when you watch it, you go, oh, yeah, this is spectacular. Okay, number 12, Cool Hand Luke.
Whoa!
Yeah. When you said it, I was like, yep. It usually is in my top 10 list. And actually, there are 2 movies in my top 10 list, one that has been bumped off and one that has stayed on, that were actually part of a friend of mine's top 10 list. About 25 years ago, he made a top 10 list, and these 2 movies made it to his top 10 list. I had not seen Cool Hand Luke by that point, but I have seen it many times since then, and it's just one of those movies that when I think about top 10 movies that have affected me, that stay with me, give me the same feeling, and I get excited every time I see it, regardless of what part it's on. If it's on cable, Cool Hand Luke. The performances, like you mentioned, are stunning. George Kennedy's Best Supporting Actor Oscar win is amazing because it's one of those performances that it's not showy, it's not over the top. He doesn't have a big cry moment. He doesn't have a big speech. He doesn't tell you about life. He just is a true to life character. And that scene with that woman washing the car is film history at its best. It's just spectacular. Just for that one scene alone, George Kennedy should have won the Oscar because he is thinking, feeling, and saying everything that everybody in the audience is saying, but he's saying it with such truth that you cannot deny it. It's a wonderful supporting actor win. It just is. It gives me faith in the Oscars. It makes me go, yes, they got it right. As a matter of fact, side story really quick. His Oscar, I believe back in the day they were making them with nickel inside or something, or ceramic or something, and then coating it with gold. So over time, older Oscars have fallen apart, and his head of his Oscar has fallen off. And he placed it next to it on the mantle or wherever he has it at his house, on the shelf, wherever. And somebody said, hey, the Academy will fix that. He said, why? That's the one I was given. It's just, over years, the head fell off of it. And he is, I'm not sure if he's still alive. Sorry about that. But he had that Oscar up with the head next to it the whole entire time. And I respect that deeply. Something about that just gets me. And plus, the whole movie is spectacular. And it's got those famous lines in it. It's got the famous egg eating scene in it. If you have not seen this movie, it is one of those movies, if you love films, you should see. Period. And immediately, 2 minutes into it, when he's doing the meter thing at the beginning of the film, you're like, what is happening here? And you're intrigued and you have to know. And then the rest is, it just goes. And plus, Mr. Walton's in it, John Boy, not him, but his father, he's in it. So, and he has a really interesting part in it. So, it's Mr. Walton. How can you go wrong? Okay, number 11. This one went off because I wanted something animated on my top 10 list, but I didn't want that to be the reason why it was on the list. So Toy Story 3, and here's why. A couple of reasons real quick. It's a part 3, and it's as good, if not better, than the other two if you want to try to rank them. It's a part 3 that won the animated Best Picture award and was nominated for Best Picture at the same time. And it's a part 3 of an animated movie about a cowboy and a spaceman. And it is riveting. Every single time I watch this movie, just thinking about it kills me. There's something about it. It's just spectacular. When the traumatic thing in the film that happens, and everybody knows what I'm talking about who's seen the film, they know what I'm talking about. You honestly think that's their demise, and it's horrific. And you cannot stop thinking about what if they chose to go, what if they choose to go there? And when you're watching it, it's devastating. And every single time I see it, I cry. Every single time I see it, I cry in a different place, along with a new place, along with the other places that I've cried at. And without giving too much away, at the end of the film, when Woody is in the cardboard box, do you remember what I'm talking about? And the little girl looks in and goes, cowboy. And he's a young man now. I can't think of his name now. Oh my God. What's the kid's name who owns
Andy?
Andy, yes. He's going to college. His expression on his face and what he does at that moment devastates me every time. Every time. And it's just one of those movies. It's just really well told. And when I was making a list of my favorite animated films, I thought I love Toy Story 3, but I also like Beauty and the Beast. I also like The Lion King. But I thought there's something just right about Toy Story 3. So those are my honorable mentions. I'm sticking to them.
All right. Well, I'll close some threads here. So It's a Wonderful Life is number 20 on the AFI's top 100 movies of all time. And George Kennedy did pass away in 2016.
Oh, just recently too.
Yep.
Okay.
So, all right, now let's move into our top 10s. We'll just kind of go back and forth, and I'll start with my number 10, and it is Casino Royale from 2006, the James Bond movie.
I was wondering which one was going to make it.
Something that I never thought could have happened. They actually rebooted this, what a 40-year-old franchise, and were able to do it in a novel way, and they were able to still be true to the character in the novels, if I can say novel a few more times, and they were also able to make it of that time of 2006. I mean, this is a born identity type world, but they brought in new things, but they also stayed true to the traditions of the James Bond franchise by adding in things like, back in 2006, parkour was a thing, but they're adding parkour in, especially in that initial first huge action scene. Well, there's an action scene in the pre-credits sequence in the cold open, but anyway, in the parkour scene, they're able to bring that in, but then also give you an idea of who that character is by doing things like having the parkour guy running around and jumping through holes in walls and stuff, and then James Bond just like smashes through the drywall. And like those are character moments, and I've probably talked about them before, but I'm going to talk about them again, where you ultimately understand the character immediately, and it's not by one line of dialogue necessarily, it's by the demeanor of the actor and how he is bringing that character to life on screen. And it's so much harder when you have to do that to a character that's been around for 50 years, 40 years I guess at the time, so for 40 years, and to be able to tell the audience that, like, yes, there's going to be some, kind of looking back to the old James Bond, but then this is also a new James Bond. But then they, subsequently, even after this movie, have been able to build up that James Bond character to be even closer to, the original James Bond, as far as like adding in Q and all that stuff. But they knew the things to keep and they knew the things to take away. They didn't necessarily need a bunch of gadgets. They didn't need, Moneypenny even. So all the things, all the boxes that you would think they would have to check in a James Bond movie, they just started from a clean slate. And that, I think, was the most refreshing and exciting thing about this. They also gave the character a motivation, which they never really did in any of the other James Bond movies. You're just kind of like dropped in and you have a misogynist character and that's just who he is, and you just deal with it. And it was, 1962 when we met James Bond the first time. So, things were obviously different back then, but so, all the way down the line, as far as like making an homage to the gun barrel sequences and the opening scene being in black and white, and having a real grounded relationship between the two main characters, between Vesper Lynd and James Bond. Those are all things that I can just it's my number one favorite James Bond movie of all time, no matter what. Even though I love Sean Connery as James Bond, I still think this movie, if I was to pick a movie, this is my favorite James Bond movie of all time, and I can watch it anytime, as many times, and I'll never get tired of it. So their use of music, David Arnold, being taking the John Barry score and also taking the Chris Cornell song that he and Chris Cornell worked on, that theme song, which I like, and they were able to, orchestrate that and weave that in, and then give you hints to, give you melodic and harmonic hints to the James Bond theme, but they don't even pay off the theme until the very, very end of the movie. And that to me was it's just a stroke of genius. So there's many scenes in there that are amazing. The dialogue scene on the train between Vesper and James when they meet initially, and I mean, from then on, I love their chemistry. I also, love the action sequences, not just in the beginning, but just throughout. They have solid action sequences throughout the film. So that's why I love it, and that's why it's my number 10.
That's incredible. I knew a James Bond would be on your list, but I have to honestly say I've only seen it in bits and pieces. I've never seen it all the way from beginning, middle, and end. I don't know why. And we've discussed this before. At this point, it's going to be the next film that I watch because I can't believe I have not seen it all the way through. I feel like I've seen it enough to know what you're talking about because, like, I'll come into the middle of it and start watching it. I'm like, this is really good. This is really well done. And I do that with some movies, and I think that's unfair to the film, but I also think that's a credit to the film that the the sequences are so great that you don't even really need to see the order of it, if you will. So that's definitely going to have to be my next watch movie because, especially since it's on your top 10 at this point. So, wow, that's good. I was wondering which one it was. There it is. All right, so my number 10 is The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. I love origin stories. I just do. I laughed, I cried, I screamed. I almost left this film in the middle of it. When Gandalf falls, I turn to my friend and I tell this story every time I talk about this movie. And I said, is he gone forever? And he was like, sit down. I was like, nope, I'm out of here. Because I fell so in love with Gandalf and I fell so in love with Ian McKellen's performance of him. He's just magnetic. And he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor that year. It would have been a great win if he had won. I'm sure I could look up who did win at this point, but it says something that I can't remember that right off the bat. It might have been Tim Robbins from Mystic River. I think that might have been it. And he was winning all of the awards. There is something about introductions to characters that I love. There's something about learning about new people and new places, and this does it on a bunch of different levels. There's something about the way he opens the movie. It makes it make sense for this world, and the whole thing about myths turn into legends, legends turn into blah blah blah, truth, whatever. That whole opening sequence, narrated by Cate Blanchett beautifully. Originally it was supposed to be Gandalf, but they went with Galadriel. There's a calmness to it that allows you to sink into this very troublesome movie. I mean, it's got a lot of violence in it. It's got a lot of bad things that happen to really cool people. But there's something about the way she does that opening narration that just keeps you at a certain pace. And, Peter Jackson did something that was impossible. He took 3 books, made it into a trilogy, and won gazillions of Oscars. He won 4 for this, but I think it was like makeup and that kind of stuff. Nominated for Best Picture, but didn't win. Nominated for Director, but didn't win. Later on, he won with Return of the King. Both of those, picture and director, deservedly so. But every single time I watch it, I honestly and truthfully forget what's happening. Like, are they going to make it across the bridge before the Dark Riders show up? Are they going to make it to Strider before the Dark Riders? I mean, I honestly forget. I mean, I don't. Of course, I know what's happening, but there's something about the way the movie is told that I'm in it every single time I watch it. And I love fantasy movies, and I love things with horses and dragons and swords and wizards and all that kind of stuff. But I only have so much of a limit for that. I can only go so far into that world before it starts to break into like a sci-fi film or a action film where it just takes it strangely into a world that makes it completely not believable for me anymore. This film never does that for me, ever. And everybody has sort of an issue with the ending of the film, and I get it because it is a part 1 of a trilogy. And I do think if I would be allowed to at all critique something that Peter Jackson did, he's on my top 10 list, so I'm going to say it anyway. I do think he could have figured out a way of concluding that story and making it all-encompassing, beginning, middle, and end. He just chose not to, and I'm fine with that. But there's something about it. I often wonder, can you go back and just watch Return of the King if you were to watch all the best pictures that won and you came to Return of the King? It's a part 3. So do you have to watch the other 2 to enjoy it? I can't ever sit back and say that because I no longer can be objective about something like that because I know everything that's happened. I understand everything. And then I have all the DVDs with all the extras, so I understand all the extra stuff. And I have watched all of the documentaries from all of the films. They're fascinating. The costume person put emblems underneath things that you will never see on film. Ever imprinted these patterns, and especially for the elves, she imprinted all of these patterns and all this stuff, and it's just an enormous amount of work just because that's the right way it should be. And I think that's how this film comes across. So number 10 is Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring.
That year that Ian McKellen was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, Jim Broadbent won for Iris.
Oh, deserved.
And I haven't
Who else
seen
was
Iris.
nominated?
He was also up against Ethan Hawke in Training Day and Ben Kingsley in Sexy Beast.
Yeah, it's a good year.
That's a good year. Yeah.
It's a good year. Yeah.
And okay, so all right, so my number 9 was a shock to me. And this is one of the new ones that I put on, and I didn't say at the beginning, but I watched all these movies within the last month. I've seen all of them again. Like, in fact, some of them, about half of them within the last 3 days. So it was a race to the end. But this movie, it is something I could never get out of my mind, and I find myself thinking about it a lot. And I've probably seen it the least of any of the movies on my list, and it's from 2013, and it's Spike Jonze' Her, and it's an amazing movie, and I think that it does something that it's actually a movie that is different from all the other movies on my list in that it is a more emotionally centered movie than any of the other movies on my list, and it really digs deep into human emotion. And I think that I might be more willing to accept that because it's centered around kind of like a near future and technology, and it's a near future that you can actually see like ahead. It's not Blade Runner. It's not something that is just, a complete, like, super future that, everybody's flying around in cars and all that stuff. It's a believable eventuality if you want to go there. And it's shot beautifully by Hoyte van Hoytema, who also shot a James Bond movie and has shot a bunch of things. He's the DP for Let the Right One In, and I mean, you can go down the line. He's done some amazing films recently, and I think he's won an Academy Award. I'd have to look it up, but I think he has won an Academy Award recently. But anyway, so the way that they shot on digital and the way that they frame these, and we even talked about this. This was like our second episode or third episode or something that we talked about this movie. So I guess you can go back and listen to what I thought about then. But just even now, watching it again, being able to see a character who's kind of like he's a passive person, and he's in this world where that is, he doesn't know where he fits, I guess, and he's just lost, the love of his life, and he doesn't want to divorce her, and he doesn't know how to deal with things, and he doesn't know how to interact with people. And it's also in a world where, and where I guess we're, increasingly getting to this world where it's kind of socially acceptable to not interact with other people. And he, kind of gravitates towards an operating system, and this, determines that, he's able to create a relationship with this operating system voiced by Scarlett Johansson. And they're able to connect with each other, but it gets a lot more complex very quickly. And you're able to see a relationship grow, but you're also able to see that relationship and the complexities. And it is a true relationship, but you're able to see the complexities associated with a real person and a computer thing that has these emotions that were coded into them, and what they have to kind of go through. And as the movie goes on, how they both evolve. And so I don't necessarily want to like give a bunch of spoilers or anything like that for it, but But the fact that, all these movies, and I'm going to talk about music for all the movies on my list because it's a huge part of it. Arcade Fire, who I don't really listen to very often, did the music for this film, and I think just getting the right pieces together allow this film to just grow and blossom, and having amazing performances, not only from Scarlett Johansson and Joaquin Phoenix, but also from Olivia Wilde and from Amy Adams, who is just absolutely amazing. I'd say this time watching this movie, seeing the subtlety of Amy Adams, which, I mean, I guess is, you could say everybody says she's a great actor, and she's a great actor, but seeing her subtlety and seeing how she can have a lived-in character in only a handful of scenes, and the fact that the very last scene involves her and Joaquin Phoenix, that what she does throughout the film makes that last scene pay off for me, and it also brings up something that I'd never noticed before in this movie, that there's a scene between Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson, his operating system, where it's right after kind of a semi-traumatic thing in their relationship, where they get a surrogate person to be the body, while they try to be intimate, and this surrogate person is the body, while Scarlett Johansson is the emotional portion of the woman, and it doesn't work out. And then afterwards she kind of does this kind of like breathe in and sigh thing, and they have a whole back and forth. He's like, why do you do that? That doesn't make sense. You're a robot. You don't need to do that. And you don't need to breathe. You don't breathe oxygen. And that's kind of like the beginnings of a lot of their troubles, kind of like the beginning of the second act, or the end of the second act, the conflict. And so we go through the rest of the movie, but then at the very end of the movie, and I'm not spoiling anything necessarily, but at the very end of the movie, it drops to black, and then you hear that sigh again. And it was awesome, because this was already on my list, but even little things like that, little details, it was something that, you can tell that the filmmaker, Spike Jonze, adds in there, and you can draw so many conclusions from that. I mean, I have an interpretation of that is it's a very humanistic thing that happened, but it was done by this artificial intelligence that was created by humans to be human, but wasn't able to be human, but was still, trying to embody human emotions and feelings, and that was the thing for her to do at that moment. And it was the thing that I think at the end of the movie it's a representation of where those two human characters are at the end of the movie. And it's all because of that computerized, artificial intelligence character. And I think that that's the crazy part, that, humans developed something that ultimately is allowing them to be more human and more emotional. And that was just awesome.
Well, that's exactly the pattern of our podcast. When we talked about that, we actually talked about how a machine made somebody feel more human than he had felt most of his existence. And that connection is connection, regardless of where it comes from. Do you have any less of a relationship with somebody if you talk to them on the phone primarily than you do if you talk to them on the computer or Skype or whatever? It's, it does beg the question of physical intimacy, but there are a lot of people who have intimate relationships who are not physically attracted to each other and or don't have physical relationships for whatever reason, because they're gay and straight, brother and sister, ex-husband and wife, whatever it might be, that it's about intimate connection. And really, it's ultimately about him finding how to communicate with another being. It doesn't matter what that other being is, per se. And they treat that with much respect in this film, as they should. But it's about him realizing that maybe if he had this kind of open feelings towards his wife, maybe that would have worked out differently. That's a whole nother subject. That's not really explored in the movie. It begs the question. I love this movie. I adore this movie. I've seen it at least 5 times at this point, and I find something new and original every time I see it. I'm blown away by all of the imagery that represents certain things that they don't speak of in the film. I love the performances. Amy Adams is mind-blowingly great, but so is Rooney
Mara, and I did not talk about her.
Really,
yes,
right?
she's
I was
great
thinking
too.
of her sister. I couldn't think of her name. Yeah, she's really great, and so it's just really a beautiful movie. It's a good movie for you to have on your list because I know some of your other films, and you're right, they are not as emotionally centered, and those are the words that you used, and mine are nothing but emotionally centered. And that's why I dig what we do, because we're so polar opposite when it comes to things like this, and these lists are going to prove it. But at the same time, we ended up with Cool Hand Luke on our honorable mention list. So yeah, and Hoyt van Hoytema has not won an Oscar. I just looked it up. He was nominated for Best Achievement in Cinematography for Dunkirk. Deserved.
There we go. So that was the most recent Oscars.
But that's the only. Yeah, that's the only Oscar he's been nominated for at this point. Surprisingly so, not for her. I'm surprised about that, because that definitely seems like, I mean, it's a beautifully shot film.
Yep.
But that won original screenplay, and I was super excited because I think at the time we both wanted it to win, but we didn't think it would win, and it ended up winning, and it deserved that Oscar, no doubt about it. All right, so I'm going to go on to my number 9, Silver Linings Playbook. Of course, it has to be
low.
It is low. It is low. It is low comparatively speaking, but see, I ranked them because you ranked yours, but I don't normally think of them as 1 through 10, and this being more favorite than the next one. I just think of them being my favorite movies. But it is also recent, so it is in the lexicon of my language, and Jennifer Lawrence is a huge star, and Bradley Cooper is a huge star, and this film just affected me in a way that it keeps coming up as a reference. Now, what will be interesting is 20 years from now, when I do another top 10 list, will it make it higher if it's still being referenced as much as it is at this point? There's nothing, and let me repeat, nothing I don't love about this movie. Nothing. I even like the flaws, and I've seen it enough times to see things that most people don't see on the first time. There are editing issues and dialogue issues and time frame things that don't make sense. They're jogging down the street and she pops out of nowhere, and you can clearly see where she's supposed to be coming from. I mean, there's just small things that you only notice after seeing it many, many times. None of them bother me. None of them. Speaking of emotional centers, there is something about this movie. I cannot put it into words. I don't know what it is. It affects me on such a deep level. It is a romantic comedy, but that is really, really kind of limiting this film by saying romantic comedy, because that brings up some kind of image in people's minds that this film is not. But it is a romantic movie with comedy in it, and it's a boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl film. It's a stock idea, but there's something about the mesmerizing performance by Bradley Cooper, and only because Daniel Day-Lewis was nominated that year did he not win. He would have won that Oscar if Daniel Day-Lewis was not nominated for Lincoln. He just would have. He shows all of that mental unstableness that he has in this way that elicits sympathy, not we don't turn a cold shoulder to him even when he's having his freak out moment. It's just well done. He could have played it so far over the top that he could have lost control of it, but he doesn't. He just holds it down. There's just something about him in this movie. And of course, jumping right to Jennifer Lawrence, that's this is my second experience with her, first being Winter's Bone. And I remember saying back in the day, and it wasn't recorded on a podcast because we weren't doing a podcast at the time, but I did film my favorite movies of the year that year because everybody has always asked me to do that. And I said, Natalie Portman will win for Black Swan, but watch out for Jennifer Lawrence because the next film that she's in, she will win the Oscar for. And this happens to be the next film. Well, I think she did something in between, but this is the next one she was nominated for. And she won. And I keep watching it thinking I'm going to lose something. The polish, the shine is going to come off of her performance, but I keep seeing it as this layered, textured performance that somebody in her early 20s seems like, first of all, she's way older, and in a good way, not a bad way, and so much more lived in, like you said about Amy Adams. I believe she can walk off the screen, and I would either love to work with her or hate to work with her. It just depends on what mood Tiffany was in, I think. That's Jennifer Lawrence's character's name. But De Niro was nominated for the Oscar. Thought he should have won. I'm fine with who won. I can't remember right off the bat. Jackie Weaver was also nominated, and I think she has little to no dialogue. She has some dialogue, but it's nothing major. But if you go back and watch that movie again and watch the way she reacts to Bradley Cooper and Robert De Niro freaking out on each other, it's amazing. And you hardly ever see her on camera, but when she stop it, when she's doing that whole Northern Philadelphia thing, which is where my parents come from, and I know these women, I was raised by these women, it is on point. And it's nice to see Jackie Weaver being recognized for what some people might say is a throwaway character. She's not that developed. You don't know that much about her. The only things you know about her are in context of the actual film. Little do you don't learn a whole lot of backstory to a lot of people in this. You don't in the book either. But she just pulls out these nuances that it's just skill at the top of its game. And like I said, my parents are from Philadelphia, so I know these people. And I swear, when I saw this movie, first of all, I came out of my seat when the ending happens with the dance competition, as well everybody did. And I felt great, but at the same time, I felt sad that people have to go through all of that mental strain in their life, and they have these genetic predispositions that allow them to not be seen equally like everybody else in society, and they put you on a different standard. It was just all encompassing, up, down, all around. But I swear, when I came out of that movie, I turned to my buddy and I said, that Jennifer Lawrence, she's going to win the Oscar. When she pops that beer open, actually, she says this before she pops the beer open, but something about it just makes me remember it like this. When she pops that beer open and she goes, I'm Tiffany, by the way, I was like, oh my gosh, I was raised by these women. That's exactly what people act like in Philadelphia. Something about it was so true. And then she takes Robert De Niro down in the scene, and I'm like, oh, wow. She just like doubled down on Taxi Driver. What happened here? She takes over that scene. She just does. I have spoken about her in the past. I will speak about her in the future. I know she's this big star, and she's now become divisive and polarizing and all this other stuff, and her personality's wacky and all this other, but she is just on point in this movie. I love this movie. I always have, always will, and it will be interesting in the future to see where it lies. So number 9, Silver Linings Playbook. God, I love that movie.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to preface this next one with, I know that these movies that I'm talking about may have all come out within the last 20 years, but it's purposeful. In my top 10, I don't feel like the movies that came out fairly recently that actually made it on this list can even like really get down into the bottom, even the bottom 5. So some of these movies may feel like they may be my number ones at one point in my life, but right now it's just too early. Like it's possibly the honeymoon phase, and I'm not willing to move them all the way down into that kind of like the hallowed ground of my top 5 favorite movies of all time. So that was my preface. This is my next movie. It is my number 8, and it is Damien Chazelle's Whiplash. So when it came out, I was excited about it. I was excited about it before I saw it. I was even more excited about it after I saw it. And I mean, it's like this Venn diagram of perfectness for me. I was in jazz band. I played trombone in jazz band, but I was in jazz band in high school and college. And, I played drums. I took drum lessons. I played on drum line. I love jazz. I just love listening to jazz. And on top of all of that, we get some amazing performances by J.K. Simmons and by Miles Teller. And we get this small contained story about, and I even wrote this at the top of my list and bold and underlined, it's obsession. And as I go through my list, you're going to see that kind of keep cropping back up and up and up. And especially with this movie, that is one way to describe this movie. You have two main characters that are completely obsessed. And I think that we've talked about in the past, the relationship between the teacher and the student, and, whether it's healthy or not healthy. And I think in this case, in this film, you can make a great case that obviously physically it's not healthy at all what J.K. Simmons' character is doing to Miles Teller's, first year, jazz drumming student at this, college, this music college. But ultimately, as you move through the movie, you see that these two men actually develop a relationship, even though it's a non-traditional relationship, and even though it's a relationship that's detrimental to both of them. They ultimately get into a situation where they understand each other. And so, I mean, if we're talking about arcs here, and if we're talking about, just amazing character performances and character arcs, I think that this film right away just handles all of that. It also has great music in it, amazing music. Justin Hurwitz did some individual arrangements for the film, and then they obviously played standard tunes and things in there too, and they had older tunes in there too. But it was so well done. And the first thing I talked about when we talked about this movie initially in our podcast was the editing. And guess what? It won an Academy Award for film editing. I think it may very well be one of the best edited movies of all time. And I could say that more confidently than I think I can say that it's, one of the greatest movies of all time. But I think not only the technicality of the editing, as far as some of the scenes where you're bouncing back and forth, getting different angles on different instruments during the playing, during some of the songs, but just the way that they move the film forward. It is like a freight train moving forward, and it does not stop. But it also gives you enough time to see these characters, what they are at the beginning of the film, and then how they're changing throughout the film, and then ultimately where they both end up at the very, very end of the movie, which is it's one of the most affecting scenes that I've ever seen. And I think, once again, a lot of it has to do with the subject matter, and has to do with the fact that I don't have what the Miles Teller character, Andrew is his name. I don't have what Andrew has. I don't have the same natural ability that he has, and then also the kind of crossing of having natural ability and the drive to develop that natural ability, and also the person that will not accept mediocrity to your detriment and to their detriment. Like, all of those together, just seeing that and being in, once again, we talk about this all the time, being in a safe space in a movie theater, and being able to watch that and what comes out from that, or what could come out from that, without having to take all of the risks that are associated with that. It's amazing just seeing that, and seeing what can, this is how, and they even talk about it in the movie, this is how people become great in some ways. I mean, some people are just gifted and they don't need anybody to push them, but other people do need other people around them to push them, and to not accept no, or to not accept it's okay, or that's good as a standard. So it's an amazing film, great music, amazing direction, great performances. Obviously, it's amazingly edited, and I think that, you know, depending on, I mean, obviously new movies come out every year, and I always am seeing older movies, so I'm not going to ever say that, you know, that it's always going to be on my top 10, but I could very possibly see this movie moving up in my top 10 in the future.
Well, three real quick things. I remember when you told me it made your top 10 list that things got bumped off for it, and I was like, wow, that's impressive, because I knew you loved this movie, and for all of those reasons that you just stated. Second, it's fun to see you lit up about a film. Not that you don't normally get lit up, but you are very lit up about this film, and you're having the same exact reaction to it that you had the moment you saw it and texted me that we needed to talk about this film. And then when you talked about it, you have that same kind of like, and I love that you say it's a great way to be obsessed and to follow something through without having the natural ability, without having the drive, and to sit in the safe theater and watch somebody do it. This is a sports movie. That's what this is. It reminds me of those epic films that start off with, you know, a Jamaican bobsled film or team where they're the complete underdogs, and then, you know, I've never seen that movie. It's just the example that came to my mind. Or, you know, a team that's, you know, being trapped in a concentration camp. I think that's what Victory is about, if I remember correctly, with Sylvester Stallone and Michael Caine, I believe, and Pele's in that. It's just this type of film. Whiplash is that type of film where you start out with somebody who has the ability, but he's still the underdog and the overbearing coach and the overbearing teacher, and you think that you're going to get this emotional, cathartic experience at the end. Oh, I was just pushing you to make you great. And you don't get that, because that's not the teacher, that's not the relationship, that's not the experience that you're meant to have. And it's a fantastic film. I've seen it 2 or 3 times since the first time I saw it, and I tend to watch different things in this movie. First time I was, of course, watching the performances, because that's just where my eye goes first. The second time I was watching, because you talked so much about the editing, I just don't understand how they were able to do that. I don't understand how you keep everything in time and show the right amount of beats on the drum and showing what the drummer's doing at the same time you're showing an emotional effect. I can't understand it. My mind cannot process that. It must have been... You obviously have to have a mind for it, because it would be tedious for me to go, okay, well, what about that one shot where he was hitting the cymbal, but then I couldn't do it. And it's really well done. And I think that it was nominated for 5 Oscars and won 3 of the 5. And I think back in the day, you were like, I'm not sure it's going to win any of it. And I was like, these kind of films have a way, other than J.K. Simmons, who was going straight down the line. So I was as happy as you were when it won Best Editing. So good choice.
It also won Best Sound Mixing, and then you're right, it was nominated for Best Picture and Best Adapted Screenplay. And then real quick, Victory was about POWs in Nazi-occupied France instead of, they weren't in a concentration camp. So they were like soldiers. So just wanted to make sure people...
Point still made.
Well, yes.
Boy, yeah. Are you fact-checking tonight? I love that, actually. I think that's a great idea. I think we should actually do that more on a regular basis, because we get so wrapped up in what we're talking about that sometimes we just throw things around. And, you know, I don't like it when I get things wrong, and I don't like it when other people get things wrong. And not that I don't do it all the time. It's just, it's good to have like a Wikipedia thing going on. I like that. It's good. It feels like it's good information. All right, so going on to my emotionally drenched top 10 list, and I'm going to do this very simply and very quickly. My number 8 is Dead Poets Society. It's always going to be on my top 10 list, and here's why. The first time I saw that movie, it was back in the day with VHS tapes, and I rented it from 7-Eleven of all places. Wow. Used to rent I know, right? They used to rent VCRs too. And I rented it. And I started at like 9 o'clock in the evening, and I watched it all the way through. And Oh, Captain, My Captain at the end, weep, cry like a baby all the way through the credits, because I have a soul. And then it rewound and played again, and I watched it again all the way through. And this is the honest to God truth. And I cried like a baby again. Oh, Captain, My Captain, rewound, Watched it again. I watched it 5 times that night until like 6 o'clock in the morning.
Oh,
Yes, true story. And I cried, and I had the same it had the same emotional effect on me every single time, to where I saw a picture of them on top of their desks and started getting weepy. Now, I'm a weepy kind of guy. I just am. I have the cry gene. I just do. And I feel like it's a gift. We've talked about that before. I can really feel things deeply. It would be nice to be able to put those back out sometimes too, to like utilize that. And maybe I will get there eventually. And I guess that's what this hobby known as the acting craft is doing for me. But there's something different about experiencing it when you watch something versus when you're doing it. It's a completely different emotional center, which is a good word, or good words. So I love everything about this movie. I love everything about Robin Williams' performance. I love everything about the screenplay. I love the way it's shot. I hate what happens in the film. At the same time, it just is strikingly dark in a way that it's so unsettling, because you're not expecting what happens to happen. You're just not. You're not expecting this story to go as far as it does go. And it's Ethan Hawke. I think it's his first movie, if I'm not mistaken. It's his first leading role, that's for sure. And he is brilliant. There's this spectacular scene at the end where he finds something out and he goes running through the snow and he falls. And it seems insignificant if you were to just show somebody that, but in context, it's absolutely stunning. So number 8, Dead Poet Society. I don't need to say much more because it is now a classic, but it is just wonderful.
Yep. All right. Ethan Hawke was in the movie Explorers in 1985, which was... That's going to annoy you at some point. I don't know. I just don't...
Not at all.
Part of it is just like...
Not at all.
If I have time to look it up, I'll look it up. If I don't, I won't.
I love it. We've talked about wanting somebody who could do that for us. And
that would be amazing.
Up on us. Right, so why not?
Fact checker. Oh, man, that'd be awesome. So if anybody's interested, we'll see. All right, so rolling on. My number 7 is Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds. And this movie has, once again, amazing performances. Obviously, another Academy Award-winning performance. And I mean, kind of like, I guess, a career maker for Inglourious Basterds, at least here in the United States, for Christoph Waltz in Inglourious Basterds. It pretty much like brought him to the forefront. So, this movie, I love Quentin Tarantino's movies, and I think that, I love Kill Bill. I think it's an awesome movie, but I think that when Inglourious Basterds came out, it was one of those things. I saw it in the theater, and I was excited to see it in the theater because it was the new Tarantino movie, but it was just another level of filmmaking. And it was still, Tarantino's still using, old Morricone scores, and, he still has, certain things about it. His use of extreme violence in certain scenes is there, but this has like a different center to it, and it's so based in dialogue scenes. And really it's an anomaly when it comes to movies, because when you look at this film, it's essentially just a handful of prolonged dialogue scenes, a lot of times at a table, or around a table, or with someone having milk or coffee or something. And it doesn't seem like that would be cinematic, and it doesn't seem like that would be engaging, but it is all of those things. Whether it's the lighting that they used, especially in like that first scene with Christoph Waltz's character Hans Landa and the French cow farmer at that very beginning. That, to start off a movie like that is bold, first of all, because you don't know what to expect initially, and you very quickly find out that this character is menacing. And it's not just because of his role in the film. It's not just because he's colonel in the SS. It's because of how he carries himself. And even though his like outward demeanor is like jovial, he is completely sadistic, and he knows exactly what's going to happen from the beginning to the end of that conversation. And yet he goes through the pomp and circumstance of all of those steps, like writing down the names and all that stuff. By the way, I don't know how Christoph Waltz does what he does in that scene where he's like taking out, I just watched it again recently, where he is like taking out his pen and like filling it with ink and like all this stuff while he's doing it's just like amazing machinations while staying so centered in that character, and then moving through all of that, and also just while being imposing, but then also, kind of like happy and carefree. And it's just his performance. And also, I'm going to have to look it up. The performance of the cow farmer is just, man, I'll have to look it up. But amazing performances on both sides of that table. And I may have to come back with his name. But and then we get the scene in the basement with Bridget von Hammersmark and Michael Fassbender, who's like, this is one of his first like big movies. I think he was in like Fish Tank. I saw him in that, but that was about it before this movie. And then obviously he's gone on to, bigger things. But just that whole scene was amazing. And it's just pretty much like it's a lesson in drama and suspense and tension building. And we get that time after time after time throughout this film. And it's amazingly done. Oh yeah, and by the way, it's funny. So somehow this movie has a way of being menacing and of being funny. And, a lot of it has to do with Brad Pitt's absolutely horrible accent. And the whole Bastards side and how they deal with, their tasks. So, I mean, it's a pretty simple story, but it is so engaging, and it's just, I'm in love with this movie. And it in a lot of ways, it's not, it lends itself to be a movie where you could just drop in at any time, because once again, it is, very, regimented single dialogue scenes. But at the same time, watching it all the way through, it seems like it flies by. So, and I did talk about the music. You even get a David Bowie song in this film, which I didn't know. I mean, I guess it was from Cat People, the movie Cat People, but I haven't seen that. So, but I thought it was, to me initially when I saw the film, I was like, that seems like it's kind of out of place, but it works. I think it works. It gives you the attitude of Shoshana right before she kind of decides that she's going to burn down her whole movie theater and kill all the Nazis. So, it was, it's a great film.
Completely agree. I don't know what else to say other than I saw it when it first came out, and I was blown away by it. I love the fact that Brad Pitt's dialect accent is so ridiculous that it's believable. There is a farcical quality about what he does, but at the same time, it's very serious what he does. And I think that brings levity to it in a Tarantino kind of way. Just the way he says Nazis, just the way he says that is unusual. But at the same time, there he is scalping people's heads. So how do you balance that? And I love the Bowie song. And I understand that if it was anybody else's movie, I would have a problem with that being there. But I think it's brilliant that he has the huge kahunas to just stick a song like that in the middle of a film. He does that in Django Unchained, a couple of places where it's not period film or period
like a Rick Ross song,
music.
I think, wasn't it?
Yeah. I like that. It gives attitude and swagger to the scene. We don't need to have, first of all, he doesn't set up his films to be naturalistically realistic. So we're in a different world. He's setting up a different world. And for his worlds, those kind of films or those kind of songs work. So I love it. There's nothing I can say about that film that I don't love. It's a little bit violent for people. Sometimes I always like to mention that because people get a little freaked out by that. But I mean, it does have one major scene in it that's really hardcore, but it's not gratuitous. It's a necessity, in my opinion. So I'm okay with that. But it is a good choice. And you're a dark soul there, dude. You got a dark list of movies. It gets even more interesting because I know some more things about your list. I'm on this side of the podcast, bringing emotionally centered romantic comedies.
Oh yeah, like Dead Poets Society, right?
Oh yeah, I like Dead Poets Society. Yeah, you're right. And then the other one about mental ill people who fall in love. Oh yeah, that one. And then my number 7, which is not entirely a happy-go-lucky film on any level, but it definitely is something that when the first time I saw it, I knew I would rewatch it over and over again. I instantaneously bought it and have watched it, I think, almost every year, at least once a year, give or take, if not more times. Once I bought it, On the Waterfront, 1954's. Marlon Brando's On the Waterfront. Here's the thing about this film. It's as great as everybody says it is. When you see it, if you come out of it and say, I don't get it, then I don't know how to really have a conversation with a person, because this film is as great as it has always been presented to be. I feel that way every time I come out of it. It won like 8 Oscars, and I looked it up. It is 8. I think it has more nominations, but it won 8 Oscars. Oh, the other thing is that there were 3 people nominated for Best Supporting Actor that year. 3 of them.
Wow.
There's only 5 nominees. None of them won, but all 3 of them, Lee J. Cobb, Carl Malden, and Rod Steiger, all nominated for Best Supporting Actor for On the Waterfront. Now, Eva Marie Saint won Best Supporting Actress. Some people debate that, but who cares? It's a brilliant performance. Some people thought she should have been Best Actress. Best Actor, Marlon Brando. This is his only Oscar. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Writing, Story, Screenplay, which was different back in the day. Cinematography, black and white, which was back in the day. Different editing, that kind of stuff. So it has 8 Oscars. And I cannot repeat enough times that this film is as great as everybody says it is. When you see it, there are these angles that are different than things I've seen in other films up to that point. Maybe Citizen Kane does some things, but he really takes it even further. Orson Welles does in Citizen Kane. This is Elia Kazan supporting the narrative with the way that the angles of the film are shot. There's a scene where Marlon Brando is watching her walk down the waterfront, basically, and he's watching her over a fence, and you see her from far away coming up, and they have that fateful meeting in the park. And there's just something about her so small and him so large, and the way that he shot it, that you know that this is not going to work out for the best. He is already visually telling you this is not necessarily the greatest pairing in the world. And this is before they even come close to getting together. It's just one shot after the next that's like that. It has this incredibly epic scene that everybody imitates over and over again. I Could Have Been a Contender. Everybody does that line. Everybody talks about that scene, even if you haven't seen the film. But here's the thing. Every single time, especially the first time that you see that scene, it holds up regardless of all the imitations that you've heard, regardless of all of the talk about that scene, the fact that they couldn't shoot it moving, so they had to do that backdrop thing, and that wasn't working. That's why there's blinds in the back of the car. And you hear things that Marlon Brando didn't show up on the days that he was supposed to do the other stuff on the other side of the camera when Rod Steiger was on one side and he was on the other. Is that right, Rod Steiger? Yes. Mm-hmm. I always get everybody kind of mixed up back then. But regardless of all that stuff, there's even rumor that Brando had his lines printed on a piece of paper on the top of the car, and he was reading them. There's also talk about him in Godfather doing that too. If he has to read his lines and he can do that by reading his lines, then that's even more amazing to me, because I don't get that at all. Like I just can't comprehend not knowing them and saying them as believable as he does. But that scene in the back of that car is mesmerizing. And after you see it, you feel more complete as a human being, because you've heard about it your whole entire life. And you go, that was as great, if not better, than what everybody's always talked about. The way the film looks, the way it's edited, the way it's directed, the performances are stunning. It is, once again, a film that if you have not seen, and I don't do this often about certain movies. I don't say, oh, you need to see this in order to understand movies. It's just not in my being to be like that. But this is definitely, whenever anybody says, well, what film should I watch tonight? It's usually one of 10. You know, a couple of them are on my list, but I'll usually say Citizen Kane. Have you seen that yet? Oh, that's black and white. Okay, well then we're talking a different language, because if you can't handle black and white, then, you know, let's readjust what you should be seeing. But I always recommend On the Waterfront. And I would say almost 100% of the time, every single person I've ever recommended this film to has come back and gone, oh my gosh, I can't believe I haven't seen this movie yet. And it is spectacular. It's just great. It just is great filmmaking. Now, a lot of people talk about that was the big golden years of Hollywood and that they haven't made them great since and all that other stuff. I don't buy into any of that, but it is a great example of how filmmaking should be and how storytelling on film should be. And I love it. As a matter of fact, I have not seen it in a while. And when I relooked at my list from when we did it originally, it was on there and I was like, oh, why have I not seen that in a while? And I think maybe that's what I'm missing in my life. So I will see it in the next couple of days just because it's so great.
All right, that's awesome. Oh, and I just heard an interview with Eva Marie Saint on the Filmstruck podcast, and she talked about how the scene where she drops her glove and he picks it up and then does all his whole thing with that. She did that accidentally. She dropped her glove in rehearsal, and he did that. And then they showed Elia Kazan, and he loved it, and they ended up doing that in the film. But it was a natural thing that he did in rehearsal, and then they decided to move it into the performance. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Amazing.
Okay, so all right, so my number, what am I at? My number 6 is The Big Lebowski, and I think that this movie is a Coen Brothers movie that I can pretty much watch most Coen Brothers movies anytime, especially their comedies. But this movie I could watch constantly. It is, I have down here, it's the best postmodern detective noir comedy stoner philosophy film that's out there. So, it's just all of those things.
Because there's so many of those?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a couple others that are below it, but no, it's just, I mean, I guess Inherent Vice is similar, if you want to get real specific. But it's number one, it's funny, and number two, it has more to it than just a slapstick comedy or just a some sort of hey, let's make a generic Hollywood comedy. This thing has, it seems like what the Coen brothers did, especially after Fargo, is that they just kind of like got together a bunch of things that they wanted to talk about and put together some sort of a structure, using the like noir, detective noir film as a skeleton. They brought in things like modern art and Shabbos, like Judaism and respecting the Shabbos, and, a Vietnam War veteran, and someone who's divorced his ex-wife but still takes care of her dog because he still secretly loves her, and doesn't want to let go of her. And, the Hollywood system, as far as like, Bunny, and like the landlord who's into modern dance, because he's in LA and he probably sees a bunch of other people doing it and he wants to be a part of it, and whether he is great at it or not or whatever. Feminism, the Maud character, modern art, feminism and modern art, how they intersect, masculinity. As far as like the dude being the main character of the film, the protagonist of the film, but also being someone who's just kind of like checked out from normal society. He's not in the rat race of society. Like, he's just kind of like being himself and not trying not to bump into anybody. He's just trying to like live his life, bowl a little bit, and move on. And somebody steals his rug, and then he's got to go get it back. And that's what starts this whole thing. So, the music in this movie is awesome. You've got, Carter Burwell was kind of like the guy who put the music together, and you've got Creedence Clearwater Revival. There's all kinds of different snippets of music from different genres, and you have amazing performances from everybody from, obviously, Jeff Bridges and John Goodman, Steve Buscemi, to, we get to see Philip Seymour Hoffman in an amazing performance. I'm sure we've probably talked about it before. His performance in The Big Lebowski is so, for the few scenes he has, it's so kind of spot on, and it is a performance I would not have been able to expect it to be as affecting of a performance. The way that he changes his demeanor based on who he's around, how he acts towards the dude versus towards his towards the Big Lebowski. It's just crazy. It's crazy good. We get to see nihilists. I didn't even know what nihilists were when I saw this movie the first time. So, we get to see nihilists, and we get to see the all kinds of just a cowboy narrator. Like, how do they come up with this stuff? Like, I just don't. It's not a Western, but it is a. We still get Sam Elliott as the cowboy narrator, just to give you exposition, just to get you into this film. It seems like it's not. It's counterintuitive from a filmmaking standpoint, but somehow the Coen brothers make it work. And little things like the dude hearing something from, like, George W. Bush says, "This aggression against Kuwait will not stand," and then he brings it back and uses it in his own weird, backwards ways, like, talking about his rug to The Big Lebowski, saying, "This aggression will not stand, man." He talks about, he hears about Maud saying in the parlance of our times, and he brings that back in another weird way. And one thing I noticed this time, because I seem to notice new things every single time I watch this film, was that the scissors that the nihilists are like in the dream scene when he gets knocked out, and there's the nihilists are in these like bodysuits, and they're like chasing him with scissors, these huge scissors. Those exact scissors were on a portrait, like a huge 6-foot portrait of just scissors in the background in Maud's studio. And I never noticed
I've seen that.
I was just, I never put that together. But it's like, these are all the things that he's Saddam Hussein gives him his bowling shoes in his dream, and that's because of the Persian Gulf conflict, war thing that's going on at the time. So, those things, they find ways to, like, it's one of those things where it's like the Coen brothers, they just use they use everything in the film, and it all interrelates and interconnects, and there's no wasted exposition, there's no wasted set pieces, there's no wasted characters. Even it all is in service to the ultimate story, and they do that in a nonchalant, and just, it seems easy breezy to those guys. And like, I could never do that. So it's total respect for those guys. The fact that they can make me laugh, and and make it all make sense in this weird backwards story that probably should have never been a movie on paper, but they make it sing.
All right, so my number 6 is Godfather Part 2. Now, here's the thing about these movies. I love all 3 of them. People have problems with the third movie. I don't have as much problem with the third movie as most people do, only because of Al Pacino's performance is so stunning in the third film. There are flaws of the third film that make it not a great Part 3. That said, I love all 3 of these movies. I love 1 and 2 equally, I'd have to say. But for whatever reason, I just feel like both of them can't take up a place in my top 10. I don't know why. And this time tomorrow, I might be saying, oh, I should have put The Godfather on there, not Godfather Part 2. The reason why I went with Part 2 is because every single time I watch it, and this is a once-a-year film for me also, every single time I watch it, I go, how did they do that? How did he do that again? Francis Ford Coppola. How did he do that again? And it's not even near the same as the first one, story-wise, narrative-wise. It's completely different. It's 2 different stories melded together. And usually Part 2s are just sort of repeats of Part 1, just bigger and bolder. But that's not what Godfather 2 is. Godfather 2 shows you the continuation of the family that you met in Godfather 1, but it also shows you how the family began, if you will, by doing flashback sequences with Robert De Niro in an Academy Award-winning performance that he learned phonetically. That's crazy. He learned that language phonetically. He does not know how to speak that language. I think Italian, I guess. Do you want to look that one up? Had to. There is just so much greatness to this film. Al Pacino's performance, stunning. Talia Shire's performance, stunning. There's just so many people you could just continuously mention and mention and mention. But there's just something about the way that this one's put together, the storytelling, how you see Vito's life before when he's younger, and this whole thing about putting them in sequence when they came out with that Uber edition. It doesn't make much sense to me, and that might be because I'm used to seeing them in this way. But to actually see Vito's story first and then see the rest of the saga, it just doesn't work as well to me, because there's something about seeing Michael maintaining being the Godfather and at this point trying to get out of, even though he's in it, he's still trying to get out of it at the same time. At the same time, you're seeing this young child who we know is going to grow up to be the original Godfather to begin with. It's just extremely well done. There's something about all 3 of these movies that call to me every once in a while throughout the year. I'm like, I need to see The Godfather, or I'll see a picture or a poster, or I'll see it in my collection, and I'll be like, I have to watch those. And until I watch them, I cannot stop thinking about them and until I've seen them again. I don't know if that's the power of the movie making process. I don't know if that's what Coppola did. I don't know what it is, but there's just something about Part 2. And here's on top of it, which is what I've said about these other films so far, like On the Waterfront. Godfather 2 and Godfather, when you see them for the first time, if your first response is not, they are as great as everybody has always said they are, then I don't know what you're watching, because they are just masterful storytelling, and they're epic. They're long movies. They've got a lot of dense storytelling in the middle of them. There's a lot of characters that you meet. And then the whole idea of the Cain and Abel story, for lack of a better term, with Michael and Fredo, there is something about blood on top of blood that when this plays out the way that it plays out, it's devastating, but at the same time, that's the only way it could have played out. And he does not hold back, Francis Ford Coppola. And the one, it's easy to describe it as the fishing scene, that it's so well constructed in what he chose to allow those people to speak that it's almost should be a scene writing class based on that scene alone, because you know who these two characters are, even though one is kind of an insignificant character, except for that one scene, insignificant to the rest of the main characters. But you know, if you just plop into that one scene, you know something's up, you know something's going to happen, and you learn so much out of two characters just by one of them saying a prayer. And the reason why the character is saying a prayer is not the reason why a character should be saying the prayer. It's just great filmmaking. And if I had the balls, I would put Godfather 1 and 2 on the list because they are equally great to me. But there's just something about part 2 that I just think is so smart that he got away with. He didn't get away with, it was skill, that he was able to develop a part 2 that can be seen regardless of the first one. You don't need to see the first one, and you don't need to see the second one in order to understand the first one. You just don't. And the reason why they did the third one is probably because money and everybody wanted it and that kind of stuff. And the main flaw of the third film is timing. It took too long for it to come out. There's only 2 years between 1 and 2, 72 to 74. And, you know, he did not win the Oscar for Best Director for Godfather 1. He won it for Godfather 2. So that says something. I mean, it's an amazing film. I cannot stress to people who are, especially people who are just getting into film and they want to know certain things and they want to watch certain movies, immediately I go to the Godfathers. Immediately. I'm like, watch all 3, watch them all in a row if you get a chance. Do it. And then next weekend, watch all the Lord of the Rings. You're good. So Godfather Part 2.
All right. I will circle back and say that the character or the actor whose name I didn't mention, who is the dairy farmer at the beginning of Inglourious Basterds, his name is Denis Ménochet. So closing that loop. Okay, so now we're going to go.
I was trying to look that up as you were speaking, but I couldn't find it.
Oh, no, that's fine. And here's where we'll wrap up the first half of our countdown. You can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. Go to facebook.com/actorandengineer. You can tweet us at actorengineer, and we will finish up our countdown in the next installment.